I had always thought I had the perfect life. Every morning, I woke up beside my husband, Michael, with a sense of security. He was my world, my constant, the man I believed would never let me down. We had been together for 6 years, and everything seemed so right. Our routine was simple: breakfast together, shared glances, quiet mornings with coffee. Our home felt like a haven, a reflection of our love. I spent countless hours making sure everything was perfect. I took care of our home, made sure to check in on him after work, asked about his day, and listened intently. We shared small moments that made our lives feel complete. I thought we were happy. I thought we were growing together. He was my everything, and I was his. Or, at least, that's what I thought. But something began to shift, ever so subtly. Michael started coming home later. Not much, but enough for me to notice. His excuses were always the same: late meetings, extra hours at work. I didn't want to question him. After all, he was a hard worker, and I admired his dedication. But every night, I felt a small knot tightening in my stomach. It was nothing I could pinpoint at first, just a feeling, a lingering doubt that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just the late nights. There were other signs too. His phone, once always within arm's reach, was now left unattended. He'd be distracted when we were together, glancing down at it or stepping out for calls he didn't want to take in front of me. I told myself that maybe I was overthinking, that the stress of work was wearing him down. I made excuses for him. What was I supposed to do? I loved him too much to let these small signs disrupt the life we had built. Sometimes, I'd catch him staring off into space, lost in thought. He would smile when I asked if something was wrong, brushing it off as nothing, but his eyes told a different story. I could sense a distance growing between us, though I couldn't find the words to address it. I wasn't sure how to approach him with the nagging feelings I had. He'd been distant before, but this felt different. Still, I couldn't imagine that my husband, the man I had given my heart to, would betray me. I pushed these thoughts aside, choosing instead to focus on the good. I reminded myself of all the moments we shared, the trips, the quiet evenings, the shared laughter. We had a life together. We had built something beautiful. How could I doubt that? It wasn't until one night that everything changed. I didn't plan on finding out the truth. I never thought I would need to search for it. But there, hidden in the deep corner of his drawer, was something I was never meant to see. A slip of paper. A name, followed by an address. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt the world begin to spin. My mind raced as I pieced together the details, the moments of suspicion now aligning into something undeniable. I couldn't breathe. Everything I thought I knew was collapsing. For the first time in years, I questioned everything about my marriage. I looked at that piece of paper and felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal. The man I trusted, the man I loved, was hiding something from me. And that realization hit harder than anything I had ever imagined. My hands shook as I put the paper down. The knot in my stomach tightened, the dread settling into the pit of my stomach. What had I missed? How did I not see it? The life I had believed to be perfect was now shattered, and I was left standing in the ruins of my own doubt and disbelief. The world around me felt like it was collapsing, but I was frozen. Frozen in that moment of realization. I couldn't breathe. The world around me felt suffocating as I held the small piece of paper in my hand. The name on it was foreign to me, a name I'd never heard before. The address sent my mind spiraling, and I could feel my pulse racing in my temples. I didn't know what to do, what to think. My stomach churned with a mix of disbelief and dread. I thought I had imagined things, convinced myself that I was overreacting, but now, staring at that paper, everything was clear. The life I had built was nothing but a lie. I placed the paper down gently, as if it were some fragile thing that would disappear if I touched it too forcefully. My mind kept replaying the small moments, the odd behavior that I had ignored. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the distant stares. All of it had led to this point, to the undeniable truth that my husband, the man I had trusted more than anyone, had been unfaithful. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't accept it. But the evidence was right there, staring back at me. I grabbed my phone, needing to speak to him, needing some sort of explanation, but then my hands froze. What would I say? How could I even ask him? The anger swelled up inside of me, sharp and painful, but so was the sadness. I thought of all the nights I had spent waiting for him to come home, all the times I had tried to ignore the sinking feeling that something wasn't right. I wasn't just angry at him, I was angry at myself for being so blind. How could I have missed it? The questions raced through my mind, each one more painful than the last. Had this been going on for months? How long had he been lying to me? The man I had given my life to had been seeing someone else. I could feel the tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. If I cried now, I would lose control. I wasn't ready for that. I needed answers, not to break down in front of him. I could hear the distant sound of his car pulling into the driveway. My heart stopped, and for a moment, I considered putting everything back, pretending I hadn't found anything. But that wouldn't change the truth, would it? He would come in, kiss me as if nothing had changed, and everything would remain the same, except that it wouldn't. I knew that now. I stood up, pacing, unsure of what to do next. My mind screamed at me to confront him, to demand an explanation, but my body refused to cooperate. I felt paralyzed. The door opened, and there he was, smiling as he stepped inside, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. He walked over to kiss me on the cheek, but I pulled away, unable to hide the anger that had started to bubble to the surface. "Hi," he said casually, removing his coat. "How was your day?" I couldn't answer him. My throat tightened, and all I could do was stare at him, the man who had broken my heart without a second thought. He looked at me, confused by the shift in my demeanor. His smile faltered, but he didn't seem to understand why. "Is everything okay?" he asked, and I could hear the hint of defensiveness in his voice. I wanted to scream at him, demand the truth, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I reached for the paper I had found, crumpling it in my hand. I threw it at him, and he caught it, a frown appearing as he glanced down at the name and address written on it. His expression shifted immediately, and I saw a flicker of guilt flash across his face, quickly masked by his usual calm. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice suddenly cold. I could feel the weight of his question in the air. He was trying to play it off, trying to act as if nothing was wrong, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. I couldn't believe I was standing here, watching him try to pretend everything was normal when everything had just crumbled to pieces. I took a step forward, my fists clenched, my voice barely a whisper, but filled with accusation. "How long?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How long have you been?" I sat in the living room, the weight of the confrontation still hanging over me. I could still feel the anger simmering beneath the surface, and the cold silence left by his departure cut through me like a knife. What had just happened? How had everything gotten so out of control, so fast? I had confronted him. He had admitted it. Yet, the words still felt foreign, as if they were coming from someone else, someone I didn't know. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at nothing. My mind replayed the moments of the argument over and over again, each time feeling more surreal than the last. His defensiveness, the way he tried to justify his actions, the way he looked at me with that mix of guilt and shame, it was all too much. I wanted to scream at him, demand more answers, ask him how he could do this to me. But every time I thought I had the strength to confront him further, I realized I had already reached the point of no return. There was no coming back from this. I couldn't decide what hurt more, the fact that he had betrayed me, or the realization that I had never truly known him. The man I had trusted with my heart, my future, had shattered it without a second thought. I thought we had a life together, a future. But in the blink of an eye, it was all gone. His absence felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in on me. I couldn't escape the truth, no matter how hard I tried. I couldn't escape the reality of what had happened. But I also couldn't ignore the voice in my head telling me that I needed answers, that I couldn't let this go. Not like this. I stood up, feeling an overwhelming need to find him, to confront him one last time. But as soon as I reached for my phone, I hesitated. What would I even say to him? He had already admitted to his infidelity. What was there left to discuss? I couldn't understand how he could betray me like that, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear any more lies or excuses. My thoughts shifted to the other woman, the one whose name had been scribbled on that piece of paper. Who was she? What did she have that I didn't? I felt the jealousy rising within me, but it wasn't just jealousy. It was a sense of deep betrayal. How could he have hidden this from me? How could he have kept a secret like this for so long, sharing his life with someone else while pretending everything was fine at home? I walked to the window and stared out into the night, trying to steady my thoughts. What was I supposed to do now? What was the right thing to do? Should I confront her? Ask her what she knew about me? Or should I just let it go and try to move on? I didn't know. I didn't know anything anymore. I had spent so much of my life trusting him, believing in the vows we had made, that the idea of confronting him again seemed almost pointless. What would it change? He had already shown me who he was. There was no going back. My phone buzzed in my hand, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from him. I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Please, just let me explain. I stared at the screen for a moment, considering whether or not I should respond. What was there to explain? What could he possibly say that would make it better? I was done listening to his excuses. There was no explanation that could erase the betrayal, no words that could undo the damage he had caused. I put the phone down, choosing silence over more pain. There was no point in continuing this conversation. The truth was out. The damage had been done. It was hard to breathe, hard to think straight. Part of me wanted to pick up the phone, tell him exactly how I felt, and demand answers, but I knew deep down that I didn't need him to make me feel better. I didn't need his apologies or explanations. What I needed now was to take control of my life. I needed to decide what came next. It wasn't going to be easy, but I had to make a choice. I could stay and try to repair the pieces of a shattered marriage, or I could walk away and find a way to heal. Neither option was easy, but I couldn't live in this limbo any longer. The realization hit me hard. This wasn't just about him. It was about me. I couldn't let his mistakes define me. I couldn't let him steal my peace, my confidence, my sense of self. I needed to reclaim what was mine, and that meant taking the next step, whatever that was. As I sat there in the stillness, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. I would find my way forward, even if it meant leaving him behind. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew that I had to move on for myself. And that was the only truth that mattered now. The days after the confrontation were a blur. The house felt empty, even though Michael's things were still here. I couldn't bring myself to look at the spots where he used to sit, where we used to laugh together. It felt like I was living in a world that no longer made sense. I spent a lot of time alone, trying to process everything, but it was hard to wrap my mind around what had happened. How had I allowed myself to be blind to the truth for so long? How had I trusted someone who was willing to betray me so easily? At first, I tried to keep myself busy, filling my days with distractions. I worked longer hours, went out with friends, even took up a hobby I had forgotten about. But no matter how hard I tried, the emptiness lingered. I missed the man I thought I knew, the man I had built my life with. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't keep holding on to the past. It was over. The trust was gone, and I had to find a way to rebuild my life without him. I spent a lot of time reflecting on who I had become during our marriage. I had given so much of myself to him, to us, that I had lost sight of who I was as an individual. My identity had been wrapped up in our relationship, in being his wife, and now, with that gone, I had to rediscover who I was. It wasn't easy. It felt like I was starting from scratch, trying to pick up the pieces of myself that had been shattered. But deep down, I knew that this was my chance to rebuild, to become stronger than I had ever been. I also began to understand something important. He wasn't the only one responsible for what had happened. Yes, he had betrayed me, but I had allowed myself to stay in a relationship that was no longer healthy. I had ignored the signs, convinced myself that everything would get better, that the love we shared was enough. But it wasn't. And it wasn't just about him. It was about me too, about learning to value myself and stop accepting less than I deserved. One evening, I sat down and wrote everything out. My feelings, my fears, my hopes for the future. It was cathartic, like I was finally letting go of all the anger and pain that had been building up inside of me. I wrote about the hurt, yes, but I also wrote about the strength I knew I had within me. I wasn't broken. I wasn't weak. I had the power to move on and create a life that was better than the one I had lived before.